While conducting national surveys, Scott noticed that a small group of respondents seemed to have wildly different perspectives on major issues than the rest of Americans. So, Scott, I'm interested. What'd you find out?
Well, first you have to understand, I look at lots of survey data. We do a minimum of 2 national surveys every week. And after looking at hundreds and hundreds, I noticed that people with a postgraduate degree had different views on most things. You hear a lot about the diploma divide in American politics. You know, Republicans tend to be people without a college degree. People with a degree tend to be more Democratic. There's a little truth to that, but the bigger truth is people with a postgraduate degree have wildly different views than most Americans.
Okay.
Second group, people who live in densely populated urban areas. And we define this, and it was really something we learned through observation. People who live in a zip code with 10,000 or more people per square mile. We're talking big cities. We're not talking, a rural center of a state or perhaps a Des Moines. We're talking Manhattan type of place.
Okay, got it.
And then the other group, not surprising, people who make more than $150,000 a year. That's about 20% of Americans. I had this crazy idea. I looked at all this data and said, what if we combine them all? What would that look like? And the thought behind it was, well, if you get a post-grad degree and you move to Manhattan or Washington, you might have different interests than if you move to McKinney or Cedar Rapids or somewhere. So we began to do that with some experiments and found stunning results along the way. First thing, let's take a look at what voters think about a basic question. 57% of voters say we don't have enough individual freedom in America. Makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. You're right.
Only 16%, so there are a few who think there's too much individual freedom. But again, by a 3 or 4 to 1 margin, voters are saying too much.
Okay.
What about this elite 1%? Only 21% say we don't have enough individual freedom. And 47%, half of the elite 1%, say we have too much individual freedom.
That's stunning.
Yes, that's a little terrifying. And it was something that we had a hard time grappling with as we began to look through it.
Okay.
And then when you're a pollster and you get new numbers, you begin to look at things and say, what are the interesting subsets? And we found a group within the elite 1% called the politically obsessed.
What does that mean? Okay, so I talk politics. I talk with my friends, my husband every day probably. Am I obsessed?
Probably. Our definition of politically obsessed was people who talk politics every day.
Okay.
Only 8% of Americans talk politics that much. Half don't even talk about politics weekly. So among the elite 1%, about a third talk politics all the time. We call them the politically obsessed. And let's be real, these are people who play a big role in establishing the media narratives and establishing government policies. They're very influential.
Oh my.
2 out of 3 people in this group think, the politically obsessed elites think we have too much individual freedom. Now, a big part of that is they trust the government, partly because they are the government. They know, some people think there's a deep state conspiracy. I tend to look at it more as a fraternity. They went to school together. They know somebody who knows somebody. So they trust the government more than they trust our freedom. Another big difference, and this goes right to the trust angle, only 6% of voters have a very favorable opinion of a member of Congress.
That one doesn't surprise me.
No.
Right. I kind of hear that a lot, and you can't really get anybody on the phone.
Right.
Or do they really help you?
Right. When you get to the elites, again, the politically obsessed elites, they tend to have a very favorable opinion of a member of Congress because they can actually get in and talk to someone in Congress.
That's the difference.
Yeah, big gap. And they also have tremendous trust in other institutional elites. So this is a trust gap between the American people and those elites. Okay. But here's the one. Now, look, I've been polling for a very long time, started in the 80s. So, I've been doing this for a while. We asked voters, suppose your candidate lost a close election, but their campaign team knew they could cheat and get away with it to win. What would you want them to do? 7% of voters say we'd like to cheat and win. Now, I wish that was 1, 2, maybe 0.
Right,
yeah, that would be
nice.
ideal.
Yeah.
But, there are politically obsessed activists on both sides who say, well, no, we have to win at all costs.
Okay.
Among the elite 1%, 35% hold this view. Kind of amazing. But guess what? It gets even worse. This next number I'm going to show you is the most terrifying poll result I have ever seen.
Okay, I'm ready.
Among the politically obsessed elites, 69% say they would rather cheat than win. What this means is they have no respect for voters. They have no respect for our founding ideals. They think they know what's best for the rest of us.
You know, earlier you gave a statistic that showed that folks on both sides, almost 2/3 of people on both sides, think that elections were stolen. Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, people on both sides, everyday Americans think the elections are stolen. These people think it's okay if it's their win.